To address the issues facing Tennesseans today, from 10 News, this is Inside Tennessee.
Along with my co-moderator, John North, and you know it's serious when we're standing up. We're going to talk about maps on this Sunday morning, so get ready to have some fun because we're going to explain what redistricting is and why you should care about it. Why does a map like this in Knox County look like it does? Well, it's because of the census, and we're going to dive into that with a key expert from the University of Tennessee's Howard Baker Center for Public Policy, Dr. Katie Cahill, who is the Associate Director. Dr. Cahill, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Let's start with the basics. John has some more specific questions, but for people who don't understand what redistricting means, explain that, and then we'll move on.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So redistricting is the procedure that follows the decennial census. So every 10 years, the U.S. Conducts a census of the population, and redistricting is the redrawing of power lines, literally the lines of political power at multiple levels. So at congressional levels, state levels, and all the way down to the local level to your school district, in order to ensure that the population is balanced in terms of its representation.
And Dr. Cahill, this process is underway at all those levels. State lawmakers are working on it, as are our local lawmakers, and that's going to be our focus today.
That's right. The U.S. Census data actually just recently came out. Right now, it's actually still in a form that's not as easily accessible for the broad public, but actually next week, the U.S. Census will be releasing tables which show population counts based on the 2020 census. And so that will be a lot easier for the broader public to access, but already this process has started at multiple levels with people looking at that data to determine where the state has grown in terms of population, where the population has declined, and what to do in terms of that redistricting process.
So that brings us to this next map. And John North, I'm going to let you build on this. Again, this is from the 2020 census. Dr. Cahill sent it to us. Our focus is Tennessee, and you can see the population is up 8.9. As John mentioned, we're a gainer. You can see the darker states here, especially out west and in Texas, they really gained in population, 15.9% up in population, John. Your thoughts on this, and for Dr. Cahill.
John, you're sort of looking at a future haves and have-nots. We know some states are going to lose, for example, a congressional seat, and others are going to gain. I think Texas is going to pick up one, maybe Florida as well. Tennessee is not, although our population has continued to be solid. But this really sort of gives you an idea of a lot of what's happening. You see some of the West Coast states have been picking up populations for sure, and you all know this at home, the South, because we see so much of the plates of people coming from outside the state of Tennessee moving here. We are gaining, and so are Sunbelt states. So Katie, I'm kind of curious your sort of global perspective on this. How would we see political power shift? It's right here in front of our eyes, assuming that the process works out like it's supposed to. Why should we care? What's the difference going to be here?
So for the purpose of Tennessee, we aren't going to be gaining a seat in the House of Representatives, and that's the U.S. House of Representatives, to be clear. But in terms of our the federal programs and other funding that come to the state as a result of its population size, we can see that Tennessee will benefit from having a growing population, both in terms of its relationship to the federal government, but also in terms of its own economic growth. It's always great to be a state that's growing, and certainly Tennessee is leading sort of the Appalachian region in that growth. And so that's a really good sign for the future of the state of Tennessee. What is important to note is actually at the sub-state level that growth did not accrue sort of uniformly across the state. It's probably no surprise to your viewers, but the metro regions surrounding specifically Nashville and Knoxville grew at a faster rate than the more remote rural areas of the state, and that's really important when we talk about redistricting.
Yeah, so that leads to my next question, which I wanted to ask you, and that is, okay, so metro area residents, if you will, are going to benefit politically, perhaps, and from federal programs, blah, blah, blah. But rural residents, and we have some who are watching us right now, do they potentially suffer?
So that's an open question, I would say, at this point. There are areas, especially in East Tennessee, that have declined in their population. That includes Claiborne, Hancock, Hawkins, Johnson, Carter, and Unicoi counties. And so they have seen slight declines in their population. And so that is going to be a consideration for especially thinking about those local levels of representation. However, the state of Tennessee does have legislation which has boundaries around how many counties, for example, can be within a representative district, and how finely you can sort of slice those areas. And so I wouldn't anticipate a whole lot of movement per se in representation for those places.
And I just wanted to bring, we appreciate that picture of Tennessee. I wanted to bring up the percentage change, as you mentioned, by county and population, again, from the year 2010 to 2020. And you see here, as John was talking about, and Dr. Cahill as well, Knox County way up in population. It's in that darker green, as is Middle Tennessee. You can see the counties, especially surrounding Nashville, are way, way up. And here you see on the plateau, Scott, Campbell, Morgan, as Dr. Cahill was mentioning, Roane County, those counties in particular losing some population. So we'll see some changes there. Dr. Cahill, we've got to take a quick break, but when we come back, John and I will ask you just about the people and the process of how this will all come together really over the next few months. We're back with more of our conversation about redistricting and its impact on you next.